Review the basics of powers and exponents. When you have 5, the base, raised to an exponent, the 2, that term is called the exponential expression. When you evaluate it, its value or its answer is 25. Let's remember how to read these expressions. If you saw this particular problem on your paper and you were asked to read it aloud, what would you say? If you said either 5 to the power of 2, 5 raised to the power of 2, or 5 squared, you would be correct. If you saw this expression on your paper and you were asked to read it aloud, what would you say? If you said 5 to the power of 3, 5 raised to the power of 3, or 5 cubed, you would be correct. Write each product as a power. How would you write 8 multiplied with 8 as a power? If you said 8 squared, you would be correct. 64 would be its answer. 8 squared would be its power. How would you write the product of negative 3's as a power? Be sure that you include the parentheses. That's very important. We'll explore why a little bit later. Now write each power as a product. 5 cubed would be written 5 times 5 times 5. Negative 4 cubed would be written negative 4 times negative 4 times negative 4. It's important that you include the parentheses at this point. Evaluate these powers. Find the value. Try them on your own before I click to show you the answer. There were 3 negatives, an odd amount of negatives, which gave you a negative answer. There were 4 negatives, an even amount of negatives, which gave you a positive answer. Study the following patterns for the powers of positive bases versus negative bases. So positive 2 to the first power, positive 2 to the second power, positive 2 to the third power, as opposed to negative 2 to the first power, negative 2 to the second power, negative 2 to the third power, negative 2 to the fourth power. So the powers of positive bases versus negative bases. Predict or record in your notes what these answers would be for positive bases. Now predict and record in your notes what these answers would be for negative bases. Now let's look at the difference between the powers of the opposites of positive bases. I have 2 to the first power. I have the opposite of 2 to the first power. I have 2 squared. I have the opposite of 2 squared. 2 cubed, the opposite of 2 cubed. If you can think of the negative sign in front of your number as the opposite, you will be in the right track. So here I have the opposite of 2, which is negative 2. Here I have the opposite of 2 squared, the opposite of 4, which is negative 4. I have the opposite of 2 cubed, the opposite of 8, which is negative 8. Let's evaluate these powers. If 8 squared is 8 times 8, 64, and 5 cubed is 5 times 5 times 5, 125. I'm asking you to find the value of those powers. It gets trickier because 0.3 squared is really 0.3 times 0.3, which is 0.09. Some people might prefer to think of 0.3 squared instead as 3/10 squared. So when you evaluate it, 3/10 squared is 3/10 times itself, which is 9/100. which again is 0.09. In your notes, will you please record the answers to these problems? Pause the video and record these answers in your notes. Then resume the video. Now let's explore using the order of operations to simplify. If you have 5 times -4 plus the cube of -2, please record this problem in your notes and use the order of operations showing your work to evaluate this answer. You should have first looked for grouping symbols. You have none that you can evaluate. Then you would look for exponents, and -2 raised to the third power is -8. The next step would be to multiply, divide, and the last step would be to add, subtract. Now find the value of these expressions when x is worth -3 and y is worth 4. Be sure to show your work in your notes. The first thing you needed to do is rewrite the expression with the value of x as -3 and the value of y as 4. It is very important that you use parentheses around your original x and original y value. You would first evaluate the exponents. Then, since you don't have any multiply divides, you would add, subtract. The last thing I'd like you to put in your notes is what number fits in place of x. Be sure to support your answer. The value of x should be 5. I need an odd amount of -2's so that I get a negative answer. My support is that -2 to the 5 power is -2 multiplied together 5 times as an answer of -32. Make sure that you put in your notes anything that will help you recall better how to evaluate positive bases raised to a power and negative bases raised to a power. Refer often to this video when completing the next worksheet.